looks like this is everybody. Good morning. I would like to welcome everyone to our very first webinar for the year 2022. So in today's webinar, we will be looking into how FileCloud's Compliance Center can help you with your HIPAA compliance requirements. So, well, in today's webinar, we will be talking about first an overview of HIPAA compliance in FileCloud. We'll also be covering the role of the FileCloud Compliance Center for your HIPAA regulatory requirements, how we can grant the admin user access to the Compliance Center, and we'll also go over how to utilize the Compliance Center to help you with your HIPAA regulatory requirements. So HIPAA. So what's the core objective of HIPAA compliance? Basically, HIPAA aims to protect the privacy and security of your personal health or of personal health information by maintaining confidentiality, integrity of the data, and availability of the data. With that being said, you can then turn to FileCloud to help you secure those technical requirements. In this case, since this is electronic data, so it would be PHI. So now here comes the Compliance Center. This is one of the recent features in FileCloud that was introduced late last year. It allows admin users to easily check FileCloud or their FileCloud system if it meets HIPAA regulatory requirements through a centralized dashboard. So it's easier now because they could see it in one place. The Compliance Center can only be accessed by FileCloud admin users, and that would be through the admin portal. However, when you promote a FileCloud admin user, it does not mean they automatically have access to the Compliance Center. They would have to be added to a role, and the admin role would need to have access or would need to be granted access to the Compliance Center. And this is how it looks like. So you may need to go to the admin role and enable this. So to show you a demo, here is an example of one of the admin users that I'm currently logged in. Notice here on the upper right-hand corner, I'm logged in as John Smith in the FileCloud Admin Portal. And if you notice on the left navigation panel, there's no option to click on Compliance Center. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to log in. I actually have it logged in already as the main admin user. Let me go ahead and refresh this, making sure that the session is active. So I could go into, so notice that this main admin user or the default admin users, see here on the top upper right-hand corner, it says admin, has access to the Compliance Center. I could also go into admins, and I have here an admin or a role called administrator, which I will go ahead and edit. And I will enable the read and update option for compliance. Next, I will go ahead into users tab and make sure that I have that admin user from earlier listed. So here is John Smith. Click on update role. And if I go ahead, if I go back to that other session and refresh, and log in as the admin user, I should now be able to see the Compliance Center. So once the admin user has been added to the appropriate admin role, he or she should be able to see or have the option for Compliance Center in the left navigation panel. And this is how the Compliance Center would look like. Let me just switch screens. I'm going to be using the primary admin account to continue with the demo. Let's go ahead and look into the Compliance Center. So currently, the Compliance Center supports ITAR, HIPAA, and GDPR requirements or compliances that can help you with. But in this case, in today's webinar, we will be covering primarily on HIPAA. So just a quick overview on what you can see from the Compliance Center is that on the left-hand side, you'll see what compliances have been enabled. You'll even see a summary, the compliance summary. So if you have ITAR enabled here, particularly, or for ITAR, it would show how many rules have been enabled, how many have failed, how many have been bypassed. In our case right now, HIPAA is currently disabled. So by default, compliances are disabled when you log into the Compliance Center. So what I'm going to do right now is I could enable the compliance from either under the enable configurations, or I could also click on the HIPAA tab on the top, and I should be able to enable the compliance or the checking. However, before I proceed, I would also like to cover filters. So what you have here is that you could actually run filters and search for specific actions like a violation or information or all the related events under HIPAA. So you can see that one here. I've recently enabled it and disabled just for the purpose of the demo. I could also export the events into a CSV file that would allow me to get a copy of the events on a CSV file and be able to report it as well. Now, let me go ahead and move into HIPAA particularly. So when I click on HIPAA, if you notice here, it switched screens in the HIPAA tab. It shows as disabled. So let me go ahead and enable the compliance. And if you also notice, you'll see a list of rules. These are rules that are particularly related to HIPAA compliance. So remember, bear in mind that with regards to compliance, it's actually a partnership. So you who's purchasing FileCloud for your HIPAA compliance would also have to do your role and check guidelines that you can actually accomplish. With regards to FileCloud, we take care of the technical requirements. So let me go ahead and show you what we have here. So we have currently a list of guidelines that you can enable. Once you enable a guideline or a rule, it starts checking the FileCloud system if it meets the requirements or if it requires requirements or some actions. To start with, we do have article numbers. So these article numbers would actually are clickable and would link you over into HIPAA's official documentation. So if I click on the first one right there, it would take me to their official documentation with all the needed information that you would need to know with HIPAA compliance. This is just a guide for you to be able to use. You'll also see a rule description in here that would tell you what needs to be done for this rule. And when you hover your mouse over, it would also give you instructions on which action you would need to accomplish for this particular role. Now, once you enable the role, it will populate the effective date, showing you when this date has been activated. And it will also show you a rule status. So what you will see under the rule status is if it meets the requirements, if your system meets the requirements, or if your system does not meet the minimum requirements. There's also a rule. So there are different rules in the system, in the Compliance Center. There's a rule that you could implement an action within the Compliance Center. So this is an example right here. You'll have an edit button. When I select an edit button here, I already have a pre-created. So actually in my case here, I already have a pre-created metadata set that I have set, but I could also have removed this, but right now I've selected EPHI. So this is a metadata set in my system that already exists that allows me to classify EPHI data. So I'll go ahead and click update, and that's why it automatically says okay in here, because I already have a metadata set. So basically choose a metadata set to classify your EPHI data. In FileCloud, we use metadata set to be able to classify data that gets imported in the FileCloud. So you may either classify the data based or manually by manually updating the metadata values through the user portal, or you could automate the process using smart classification and content search. which is available in the enterprise packages. Now let's go ahead and look into some of the other rules that's available for HIPAA compliance. So there is another rule in here that says promote at least one user to an admin role. This is what we actually did earlier. I do have a user that I've promoted and I've granted that user access to the compliance dashboard or the compliance center. So this is one of the examples of the rules that that an admin user could basically just enable just to confirm that this rule is already compliant. So since I already have an admin user that was promoted earlier, then I will go ahead and enable that rule. Now let's go ahead. Let's keep going down. We do have a good number of rules that you could go over. I'll go through some of the examples for rules that would require actions. So say, for example, let's pick one here for retention. So of course, there's a link that would give you, that would lead you to the official documentation for HIPAA compliance. And then you also have a description that says use retention policy. Remember, one of the core components for HIPAA is the availability of the data. So keeping the data for 6 years. So EPHI, particularly EPHI data. Now, let me go ahead and enable this rule and let's see what will happen. So I do have, this is a rule action. This prompts me that I need to be selecting an existing retention policy in my own FileCloud system. However, if you notice, it did not give me any option in the dropdown. What I could do there is I could click on the retention button, which will take me to the retention policy view that would allow me to create a policy that would satisfy the rule. But before I move into this, I will go back into the Compliance Center just to continue the navigation. So go back to HIPAA and let's go into that rule right there. So if you want to bring back that action, or if you want to bring back the window, the rule action window earlier, you can click on the edit button. That will basically open it up. If you do have existing retention policies that would satisfy this specific rule, you can click on the drop down and select that rule, and that should basically satisfy the rule status, and will tell you that if it meets requirements or if it does not meet the requirements. Now, what else? For me, I'm already familiar. I could click on issues, or I could click on the rule status here, and the rule status would tell me what needs to be done. So it says designated retention policy to protect EPHI from getting deleted for after 6 years must be created. So this is the action that needs to be done by an admin user that is responsible for the compliance center. The good thing about it, though, is that we do have support documentations that are already available on our website that would basically tell you, or for each of the rule listed in the compliance center, it gives you a set of actions that you need to be going, or that you need to do. So say, for example, this is a document that I've also attached in the presentation. And this is a document that's available in our support documents. So this is the specific rule from earlier. That is 164.3, or sorry, the 164.316. Retain files for 6 years. And it actually gives you some additional instructions in here. And same goes with the rest of the rules. So you do have specific instructions on what needs to be done as an admin user. And this is actually available in our support documentations with all the Compliance Center information available as well. So that will be right there. So basically what I need to do here is I could either click on action and then go back into retention. And I could say, for example, click on add a policy. And particularly, I'll be creating a retention policy that would be valid for, see. We could set the date. So I could do a fixed date, and I could either put in a specific date or a time period, or I could do a custom. So I'm actually going to do a custom right now, and I'm going to put in 292 days, which is basically equivalent to 6 years. And I could put in what policy expiry action would need to be done. So if nothing happens to the document, or if I want to permanently delete the document, I could do that one as well. So this would be the action for the retention policy. Next is I need to be populating the name. So delete or retain documents, EPHI data, particularly for 6 years in the FileCloud system. So this is just an example. I could use the same name here for the description. And what would basically happen here is I could add either, so I could have a specific path. So all the documents in a specific path will be, the policy will be applied, the retention policy will apply to the specific path indicated here, or I could use a metadata set. So say, for example, I could use that EPHI metadata set. And if an EPHI data has been identified within the document imported into FileCloud, I'm going to add that one. And if this metadata set exists in that document, that is when the policy, the retention policy, will apply and will keep the document in the system for 292 days. That means nobody will be able to delete the file or the data, even admin users in the system, and including users as well. So this is the retention policy. In my case right now, I'm going to go ahead and enable this like so. And I could go back to the Compliance Center, go back to HIPAA, and then go back to that requirement from earlier. Click Actions here, and I should be able to click, let me refresh it first. Oh, I forgot. Let me check if I have actually enabled the retention policy from earlier. Yes, this is enabled. Let me go back to compliance here. Okay. Let me check. I might have misconfigured something on the retention policy, because that should allow me to select the retention policy to basically satisfy this this policy or this rule for the compliance. So let me go back to this one. I may need to get back to you with some additional information on this as well. However, let me move ahead with the rest of the items in the rest of the rules from the HIPAA Compliance Center. So say, for example, let's go to this other one saying control sharing options and change existing shares to private. So say, for example, you do already have shares created in your FileCloud system that have been shared privately, or sorry, publicly. So you could go ahead and click issues, and it would tell you what needs to be configured. So it shows you here that you have a policy share or a share mode for one of the policies that needs to be reconfigured. It shows you which policy it is. So that's a global default policy, the team folder policy. And I also have another share that exists in my system that says it could not be public. So let me show you where that one is. I could go to user shares, and I'm able to see that staging or this folder that is shared publicly. I could go ahead and delete that, go back to the Compliance Center, and I could reevaluate. So I could go back to HIPAA, click refresh. And when I click on the issues, notice that it actually, or the third item on that list disappeared. It's because I have removed the public share. Now, let me configure the global default policy just to show you. And it's also available in the support documentation that I showed you from earlier. Where was that one? That is 164.312. Give me a moment. I could show you that one shortly, but in shortcut, I could go into settings and I could go into policies, and I can see here that I've got the global default policy where my share mode is actually set to all shares. So just to comply with HIPAA regulatory requirements, I want to set this one to either shares not allowed or allow private shares only, which means that if I set this to allow private shares only, users that need to access the data would need to authenticate within FileCloud. So in that way, we can uniquely identify which users are accessing the data. If we go back to compliance over here and go to HIPAA and go to that issue, if we refresh, it should only leave us with one item on the list. So that's how you basically start resolving items or the issues that are indicated in the rule status on your compliance center, or of course, particularly for HIPAA. For you to be able to complete everything here, you go into each of the item. The admin user that would be responsible for HIPAA compliance will have to go through each of the items in the list, enable it or enable the rule, and click on the issues to identify which ones are or what items are causing a violation with your HIPAA with your configuration for HIPAA requirements, for HIPAA compliance. So for this example, enable this rule once all other HIPAA rules are compliant. So you basically enable this rule once all the other HIPAA or all the other rules in this list have passed the HIPAA requirements. So basically on your system. So I would want to disable that and go ahead with the next item. Some of the other items here would automatically evaluate your system to have already passed. So you can see here, enable governance report and to send to HIPAA admin. So this is something that also admin users would need to take care, would need to process outside or resolve the issue outside of the compliance center. So this is an example. So you can see here, enable governance report emails to send to the admin as a reminder to check with the audit logs, reports. So you may have an internal process that would remind the admin users to complete this outside of FileCloud. Once this one has been satisfied outside of the compliance center, you can enable this rule, and that should mark it as okay. And then moving forward, another one that another example of rules that you can resolve within the compliance center would be choose a DLP rule to restrict logins based on GeoIP. In FileCloud, you can restrict login based on IP address and country code or a range of IP addresses. This is this is how you can resolve it. And you can basically click on the action button, click on the drop down if there's any available. If there's not, just like from earlier with the retention, you can click on Smart DLP and it takes you to the Smart DLP window where you could create the rule and create the restriction based on country code. And some other examples as well that admins would need to resolve or would need to enable the rule and basically had already resolved the requirement outside of the compliance center would be this one right here. Confirm all users have FileCloud user accounts. So if you are creating a private shares, or if you are mainly creating private shares, this would require all users to authenticate, just like what I mentioned earlier. And that would mean that all users would have to have their own FileCloud account to be able to log in or access their data. So then you can enable this rule as well. There are other rules that these are just some of the examples of the different type of rules that you could enable with in the HIPAA compliance dashboard. Once you have everything all checked, that would give the admin user that's in charge for Compliance Center an easier way of basically reporting that this is what you have on your FileCloud system. These are all the HIPAA requirements that FileCloud can help you with. And it's an easier way to show information to any auditors down the road. So if the system may need to be audited for HIPAA compliance, the admin user can just basically export the data from the Compliance Center dashboard and will be able to report the data. And these are all the items that have been met using FileCloud. So with that being said, I went through the demo. Do we have any questions so far on? I have not covered any. I have not covered all of the rules that we have in the compliance or the HIPAA dashboard. However, the rules have descriptions in them, and like I said earlier, as a navigate in the navigation, is that you can hover your mouse over, and the rule hover your mouse over in the rule description, and it would show you or tell you what needs or what action needs to be done. You could even click on the issue itself, would tell you what are the violations, and in the actions button, it would also show you, would allow you to resolve the issue within the Compliance Center. Any questions so far? I will give it a few minutes to allow everyone to come up with their questions, and I'll be waiting before we basically end the webinar. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any questions for today. Um, Moving forward, if you do have any more questions or you want to go over our more information with FileCloud, you can always go ahead, or we will also be uploading a recording of the webinar um, in our tutorial videos page. So you could go into filecloud.com/filecloud-tutorial-videos. You could also go through our documentations and access the documentation that I showed you from earlier. By going into filecloud.com/support docs, or if you may need some assistance, you may bump into any errors, you may you may go ahead and send an email to support@filecloud.com to get in touch with our support team. And once again, I would like to thank everyone for joining, and you have a wonderful day.